The silk cord tightens around your wrists. Not rope, silk. Expensive, deliberate, because silk doesn't leave marks that lower your value. You're kneeling on stone that gleams in lamplight, and the floor isn't wet with water. In front of you stand 3 doors. Behind one, women are praying in languages you recognize. Behind another, complete silence that feels like suffocating. Behind the third, laughter and the soft clink of cups. Voices discussing poetry in Arabic you barely understand. Your name is Miriam. You're 19. 6 weeks ago, your father died clutching a letter he believed would protect you. It didn't. Before we go deeper, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It genuinely amazes me that a story this old, this deliberately buried, can reach across centuries and continents to find you right now. This is Damascus, 1261. The Crusades are ending, but for thousands of Christian women left behind in the rubble of fallen cities, something far more systematic is just beginning. What happens next isn't random violence. It's infrastructure. It's policy. And it's built by people who convinced themselves they were being perfectly reasonable. Miriam's father had been a physician in Acre, one of the last Crusader strongholds clinging to the Mediterranean coast. He was the kind of man who understood that survival required relationships that crossed battle lines. He had contracts with Mamluk officials, letters sealed with wax bearing the stamp of Sultan Baybars himself, documents that promised safe passage, protection for his family and his practice. He believed paper could stop swords. When Acre's walls fell in the spring of 1261, those contracts dissolved like salt in water. The agreements he'd negotiated over years meant exactly nothing to the soldiers pouring through the streets. He died in his clinic, still holding a document with an official seal, while strangers pulled his daughter toward a different future entirely. Miriam never learned what happened to her mother or her younger sister. Different hands, different directions. She screamed their names until her voice gave out. The not knowing became its own kind of torture, worse in some ways than knowing they were dead, because it left her imagination to fill the silence with every possible horror. 6 weeks later, she knelt in that underground chamber with 23 other women, all Christian, all captured during the same campaign that erased Acre from the map, all waiting for a man named Amir Tashtymur to sort them like grain. Tashtymur entered, carrying no weapons. He wore the simple robe of a royal administrator, but the deference shown to him by armed guards revealed his true authority. His official title in the Mamluk bureaucracy translated roughly to integration specialist. That word appears in the administrative records with disturbing frequency. Integration. It sounds almost humane, like helping refugees adjust to a new society, like compassionate policy. Here's what it actually meant. The Mamluks had discovered something during their own enslavement that most conquerors never learn. Human beings are remarkably malleable. Given the right combination of time, isolation, and total environmental control, you can systematically erase one identity and build another in its place. They knew this intimately because it had been done to them. Every sultan, every amir, every commander who shaped the medieval Middle East had started as a slave. Boys purchased from Turkic tribes in Central Asia, from Circassian communities in the Caucasus, taken as children and converted to Islam, trained in warfare and administration with ruthless precision. By their 20s, these former slaves had become elite warriors. By their 30s, they commanded armies. And when the Ayyubid dynasty collapsed in 1250, it was a Mamluk, a former slave, who seized the Egyptian throne. This created a profound paradox at the heart of their society. The entire ruling class consisted of men who'd been systematically transformed through bondage. They didn't view this as tragedy. They viewed it as proven methodology. If boys could be converted into warriors, then captured populations could be converted into whatever the state required. And the state required much: soldiers, servants, artisans, laborers, administrators, and women who could perform functions that free women of equivalent status could not or would not provide. So they built infrastructure to process thousands annually. 7 major facilities in Damascus alone. Standardized procedures, medical examinations within 24 hours of arrival, classification based on age, origin, physical condition, and assessed capability. Records tracked every individual through the system. Mortality rates were calculated. Productivity was measured. The Mamluks approached human acquisition with the same systematic efficiency they applied to military logistics. Timur walked down the line slowly, asking questions in languages Miriam knew and languages she didn't. His voice remained calm, clinical. He wasn't choosing slaves, he was sorting inventory. One young woman, maybe 16, Armenian features, was asked something in her native language. She shook her head violently. Timur nodded to a guard. She was led toward the left door. Door 1. It opened briefly. Through it, Miriam glimpsed sunlight, a courtyard, dozens of women sitting in rows while men in official robes examined them with the practiced efficiency of merchants evaluating livestock. The door closed. The girl's fate was sealed in that moment, though she wouldn't understand the full implications for weeks. Timur continued his assessment. His selections followed patterns. Age mattered. Origin mattered. Physical condition mattered most. But there was something else he evaluated, something less tangible. He was measuring their capacity for transformation. When he stopped in front of Miriam, his eyes were neither kind nor cruel, just calculating. He asked his question in Frankish French. His accent was perfect. This detail matters profoundly. The Mamluks didn't merely conquer. They studied. They learned the languages of their enemies, understood Christian social structures well enough to exploit them with surgical precision. "Can you read?" Miriam hesitated. In that moment, she made a calculation that would determine everything. She could lie, claim ignorance, hope that illiteracy might make her less valuable. But something in Timur's eyes suggested he already knew the answer. Her father had been a physician. Physicians taught their daughters to read. Medical texts, correspondence, records. Lying would only demonstrate poor judgment. Yes, French, Latin, some Arabic. Timur's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. A guard brought a wooden tablet covered in wax. On it, someone had written a sentence in Arabic script. "Read this." Miriam studied the words. The script was formal, classical, a line from religious poetry. She read it aloud, slowly, her pronunciation uncertain but comprehensible. Timur made a mark on the parchment he carried and moved to the next woman without another word. Miriam didn't know it yet, but she'd just been selected for door 3. Not the left door, which led to distribution to military households as basic domestic servants. Not the center door, which led to immediate sale in the Damascus slave market. Door 3 led somewhere else entirely, somewhere that required women who possessed education, linguistic ability, skills that made them suitable for what the records called administrative household placement. 3 days later, Miriam was taken through door 3 into a smaller chamber, its walls covered with carpets that absorbed sound. 5 other women waited there, all selected by the same criteria. All educated, all multilingual, all young enough to be reshaped. An older woman entered. Her name was Layla. 20 years earlier, she had knelt exactly where Miriam now stood. Captured during a raid on Armenian territory, processed through the same system, trained in the same way. She had survived. Now she trained others to survive. What Layla taught over the next 60 days was systematic erasure paired with systematic reconstruction. Week 1. Language. Not learning Arabic, Miriam already spoke some, but forgetting how to speak in ways that signaled Christian identity. Certain phrases had to be eliminated. References to Christian prayer, appeals to saints, even casual invocations that Christians used without thinking. God willing was acceptable. Christ preserve us was not. Layla listened to their conversations with each other, correcting, always correcting, until the linguistic markers of their former faith vanished completely. Week 2. Body memory. How you move, how you hold yourself. Christian women carried themselves differently than Muslim women of equivalent social status. The differences were subtle but visible to trained observers. Posture, gesture, the way you lowered your eyes or failed to. The transformation required rebuilding these physical habits from the foundation. They practiced for hours each day, walking, sitting, standing, responding to commands. The repetition was deliberate. The body needed to forget its previous patterns before new ones could take root. Week 3. Household management. Not cooking or cleaning, tasks that lower status captives learned. Administrative household placement meant managing correspondence, maintaining account books, handling negotiations for women of the household who might not be literate themselves. Miriam's ability to read and write became her primary function. She learned the specific formats used in Mamluk administrative documents, the proper forms of address, the hierarchies that governed every interaction. Week 4 brought the most difficult lessons. Transformations that could not be practiced, only explained, prepared for. Layla spoke with clinical precision about what would be expected in the household where Miriam would eventually be placed, the nature of access that male household members would have, the responses that were required, the absolute necessity of compliance, presented not as moral instruction but as survival strategy. Resistance is waste, Layla explained, her voice devoid of emotion. The household has invested in your acquisition and training. Resistance damages that investment. Damaged investments are discarded. Miriam had seen the lower-tier markets during her first week in Damascus. Women whose resistance had marked them as untrainable. Women whose physical damage made them unsuitable for anything except the hardest labor. Women who would be worked until they died, a process that typically took between 2 and 5 years, according to mortality calculations that administrators tracked with the same precision they tracked grain harvests. By week 8, Miriam barely recognized herself. She moved differently, spoke differently, thought differently. When she caught her reflection in the polished bronze mirror that hung in the training chamber, she saw someone who could pass for a woman born into a Mamluk administrative household, someone who belonged. This was the goal. Not mere compliance, but internalized identity shift. The Mamluks understood something that wouldn't be articulated in modern psychology for centuries. Given sufficient time and total control over environment, human identity is far more malleable than most people want to believe. Week 9 brought her placement. The household of Amir Kalawan occupied an entire city block in Damascus. Kalawan would eventually become sultan, though in 1261 he was merely one of Sultan Baybar's most trusted commanders. His household reflected his rising status. 40 soldiers, 20 administrative staff, 51 domestic servants, and 14 women in the harem section, each with their own rank and function. Miriam arrived in a closed sedan chair. The transfer was documented. Papers changed hands. Payment was recorded. She had cost Kalawun 750 dirhams, a substantial sum that reflected her assessed value. Educated, trilingual, trained in administrative household management. The investment carried expectations. The head of Kalawun's harem was a woman named Zahra. She was not a captive. She was Kalawun's first wife, married when they were both young before his military career elevated him to command rank. She ran the women's quarters with efficiency that matched any military commander's management of troops. Every woman had a function. Every function supported the household's operation. Hierarchy was absolute. Miriam managed correspondence for a Mamluk household. Elite women sustained vast networks through letters, marriage negotiations, gifts, political intelligence. The work demanded literacy, discretion, and precision. For 6 months, Miriam wrote as dictated by Zahra and senior wives, invitations, thank-you notes, merchant inquiries, elegant script sealed with wax, filed in order. It was dull work, and safe, until Kalawun's second son turned 17. His father deemed it time for lessons in governance, warfare, and household management. The last required experience wives of equal rank could not provide. The system's solution was efficient and cruel: junior wives and servants. Women like Miriam. She learned she'd been selected for this function on a Thursday evening when Zara summoned her after the final prayer. Zara explained with the same clinical precision that Layla had used. This was an honor. This reflected confidence in Miriam's training. This demonstrated successful integration. Resistance would indicate failed training and result in reassignment. Reassignment meant the lower markets. What followed over the next 4 years was systematic. Kalawun's son visited her quarters twice weekly on a fixed schedule. The encounters followed patterns that had been explained during training. She was expected to be compliant, but not enthusiastic. Responsive, but not initiating. Present, but somehow absent. The emotional disconnection was the point. These were not relationships. They were educational procedures. Miriam developed dissociation techniques that women in her position had developed for generations. The ability to observe herself from outside, to be present in body while sending her consciousness elsewhere. She perfected the art of performing required responses while thinking about letter composition, about Arabic grammar, about anything except what was actually happening in that small room twice each week. During the day, she continued her correspondence work. She became extraordinarily skilled. Her calligraphy was admired throughout Damascus. She could compose in 4 languages with equal facility. She managed sensitive negotiations regarding marriage alliances with diplomatic subtlety that impressed even Zara. Her value increased year by year. The duality was the system working exactly as designed. Women who provided multiple forms of value simultaneously represented optimal return on investment. From the household management perspective, Miriam was a success story. From Miriam's perspective, she was surviving, month by month, year by year, by splitting herself into pieces small enough that no single piece had to contain the full weight of what was happening to her. She learned not to count the days. Counting made time feel endless. Instead, she marked time by external events. When Kalawun became sultan in 1279, when his son married and stopped requiring her services, when she was assigned in 1285 to train a newly acquired Armenian girl in correspondence management. That assignment broke something in her that 4 years of systematic exploitation had failed to touch. Looking at the Armenian girl, freshly processed through the transformation system, seeing her own past reflected in terrified eyes, Miriam realized she had become Layla. She was now the instructor, the one who would train the next acquisition to accept what Miriam had accepted, the one who would explain with clinical precision what functions the girl would perform. She could not do it. The household maintained a tradition that senior members could petition the Sultan directly during weekly public audiences. This was a legitimizing practice, a way for the ruling Mamluks to demonstrate accessibility despite absolute power. Most petitions were mundane: tax disputes, inheritance claims, commercial disagreements. They were heard, decided, recorded. Miriam attended these audiences as part of her administrative duties. She took notes on petitions for household records. She'd done this dozens of times. No one paid attention to her. She was furniture, another piece of the vast apparatus that kept the Mamluk state functioning. On the 7th day of October 1285, Miriam stood during a pause in petitions and spoke directly to Sultan Kalawun. The chamber went silent. Women did not speak at public audiences unless specifically called upon. Certainly not women from harem sections of households. Certainly not about their own situations. The violation of protocol was shocking enough that guards didn't immediately stop her. Miriam spoke in perfect Arabic. She had rehearsed this for weeks. I petitioned for manumission on the grounds that I have served the emir's household with distinction for 14 years, have provided valued services including correspondence management and staff training, have performed all required functions without resistance or complaint. I request transfer to the status of freed servant with continued employment in the administrative office. The petition was flawless. Islamic law allowed manumission after long, faithful service, and Maryam had gathered precedents, records, and proof of her worth. No enslaved woman had ever petitioned publicly, forcing Kalawun to justify refusal before his court. Her plan was calculated, legally sound, politically sharp, and impossible to dismiss without seeming unjust. The Qadi reviewed her citations and confirmed, "The petition is valid." Kalawun hesitated, then granted it. That afternoon, Maryam was freed, given paid work in the correspondence office and a small room of her own. She was no one's property, yet also no one's kin. Acre was gone, her family scattered. Only the Mamluk system remained. She was free, technically, but freedom only meant she could not be sold. She still lived in the same house, worked the same tasks, bound by the same system that had remade her. Yet she had chosen. That mattered. Her petition, her words, her act. After 14 years of obedience, she had finally acted for herself. The victory was small but real. The Armenian girl she refused to train was sent elsewhere. The guilt lingered. Had she helped or doomed her? She would never know. Maryam bint Yusuf died in Damascus in 1318, 61 years old. She never returned home, but taught women to read, lived simply, and kept her dignity. Her name endures in one forgotten ledger, proof she existed. Most left no trace. The cruelest systems aren't built by monsters, but by ordinary people performing duties without seeing the horror they sustain. That capacity still lives within us, when they convince themselves that systematic horror is actually reasonable policy, when they document everything except the screaming. Sometimes the smallest act of defiance, a petition spoken in a silent room, is the only victory that matters. Sometimes survival itself, the refusal to be erased completely, is resistance. And sometimes a single line in a forgotten ledger is enough to ensure that a woman who was supposed to disappear is remembered instead, centuries later by people she could never have imagined would care about her name.